Welcome, everyone, to the first ever episode of The Open Throne. I'm your host, Cole Houck, and today I'm joined by a special guest, someone you'll be hearing from often, but for now, he's our friendly neighborhood Wizards fan. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
What's up, everyone? My name's Austin. I've been a Wizards fan since I first got into basketball around 2018 and stuck loyal with them. It hasn't always been easy through the ups and downs, but after the events of the last 24, 48 hours, I have a lot more hope than I have in a very long time. I've been watching this team's games, I've been writing about this team for years, and I'm so incredibly happy about this trade that we're about to break down.
Yeah, man. And we'll dive into the media reactions here in a second. But before we do, since this is the debut episode of The Open Throne, please make sure to like the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. And comment and subscribe on YouTube as well if you enjoy the content. It really helps us grow the show and see what kind of content you guys want to hear more of. So, Austin, as the Wizards fan of this podcast, what was your first reaction when you heard the news? Where were you?
I was in my kitchen. I was actually watching the Wizards Magic game the night that it happened, and I had a feeling that it was going to go down pretty soon. I was texting all my Wizards fans like, "Hey, in the next 24 to 48 hours, something's probably going to happen," because they listed CJ McCollum out of that game for like some sort of quad injury, and it was his first time being out for the season. So like we knew it was because of the trade talks. And then shortly after that, they listed Corey Kispert out. Trae Young had been out, but it was just too many pieces all coming together. And it was one of those things where when you're making the Trae Young deal, you knew CJ McCollum's expiring contract had to be included in this because really this was a salary cap move by Atlanta, not that they were trying to get a crazy amount of talent back. So I was pretty prepared, especially with all the Mark Stein reporting that had been happening in the last day or two. So I was prepared and ready for it. I just wasn't expecting it to happen as soon as it did. I thought it would be another day or two. But yeah, I was in my kitchen. The game was just about ending and I saw the notification pop up and I was like, all right, it's official. We got our point guard.
Yeah, see, I thought it was going to be closer to the trade deadline personally.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be like a week or so before, but we got it a whole month ahead.
I know, it's great. He's probably not going to play a ton in the interim up to that trade deadline or maybe even at all this year. But still, I'm just glad we got the move out of the way.
Yeah, me too. I was in the bathroom line of the Spectrum Center right after Amino quickly hit the buzzer beating three, first one I'd ever seen. That was last night, and I was really excited about that. I was just waiting in line, and somebody behind me announced the entire bathroom that Trae Young was on the Wizards now. So I went on my phone, looked at the trade, and I was surprised, like everybody else was, that there was no draft compensation attached to it. I figured Trae Young would have more value than that. I understand why the Wizards didn't trade a pick because they've been lotteried every year for the last 6 years, except for 2021, when ironically they took Corey Kispert at 15, which was right outside. But they have a Phoenix second round pick this year that's going to be around 45. They have OKC's first, which is pretty much locked into 30. I can't believe that Hawks didn't really need one of those, or Wizards didn't give it up.
Yeah, the draft compensation aspect of this trade was really interesting because on the one hand, you have the four-time All-Star you're giving up in Trae Young, and you think, well, Mikal Bridges and Desmond Bane together combined for 10 first-round picks in their respective deals. There's no way Trae Young, even in his current state as like a guy that's averaging 25 points and 10 assists per game for his career isn't worth like at least one first round pick. But looking at this from the financial side, Atlanta was really trying to move off of his salary because they weren't going to sign him to a new deal. Nikhil Alexander-Walker has worked out so much better than they expected, and Jalen Johnson's clearly the star of this team. And they've played well without him, and with Trae Young this year, they've played 2-8. So his value was definitely at probably the lowest it's been. So in that regard, it didn't make sense that they would get a ton of draft capital back from the Wizards. And then one of the other interesting things that I've been hearing about media wise was the Wizards getting draft compensation along with Trae Young to take on his contract because while the Wizards taking on that deal isn't that big of a deal for them, Atlanta really wanted to move on and there weren't a ton of other suitable partners. And Trae Young had named the Wizards as his preferred destination, so they really had no leverage. So I think it would have been kind of crazy for the Wizards to get like Trae Young and a first or something like that. But in my mind, a second round pick or something of that nature wouldn't have been out of the question. But I think ultimately it makes sense the way it ended up with no draft capital being exchanged either way.
Right, right. And I was surprised to hear that Trae Young's preferred destination was Washington. I mean, that really surprised me. What was your first reaction when you heard that a couple days ago?
I mean, I wasn't too surprised. Washington's not the biggest market for sure, but when you're looking at the landscape of teams around the league and who could really use a point guard like that, I think one of the other destinations that Trey had floated out or that his agent had was Minnesota, which makes sense because they're in need of a point guard. Right now, their situation is Mike Conley, who's getting old, and Rob Dillingham, who hasn't like really taken over yet. But the Timberwolves just didn't have any interest in Young, so that those talks didn't really go anywhere. And I mean, if you look at Washington, is definitely the best situation for him in terms of he gets to run the offense, he gets to be the show, and he's got a bunch of young pieces to work with. And I think the biggest thing, honestly, is the tandem that will be Trae Young and Alex Sarr pick and rolls. The best big man that Trae Young has had up to this point in his career is John Collins, who, no disrespect to him, is a very solid forward, but the length, the height, and the blocking, and just the potential overall of Alex Sarr being such a young dude, there's those pick and rolls are going to be really fun to watch, and there's just so much potential there. And if it doesn't work, Trey has the flexibility, or Washington has the flexibility to in 2027 say, hey, this isn't working, let's go our separate ways. And it's no real big deal because all we lost was CJ McCollum's expiring contract and Corey Kispert, who played a role that I think is going to very quickly be filled and then some by Trey Johnson now.
Right, right. Essentially, you said that about the Timberwolves because I feel like they're the biggest contender that needs a point guard pretty badly. They should go and get somebody to replace Old Man Conley over the trade deadline. Yeah, the Wizards are really interesting. They don't have a point guard. They haven't had like an all-star caliber point guard since probably Russell Westbrook 5 years ago when they went to the playoffs. And nobody on that roster 5 years ago is still on the team today. So I don't know what this team is going to look like with the point guard. It's interesting you said that about the pick and rolls because I always thought that the Trae Young Capella pick and rolls are really good.
They were,
But
yeah.
Capella is not nearly as fast, athletic as Alex Sarr is. He's much skinnier, so he can move around a lot faster. That will be pretty interesting to see, alley oops all the time and just what the rolling is going to look like.
For sure. And also, when you're looking at the Wizards point guard situation, like you said, they have Russ. There's nothing left from those earlier teams aside from Anthony Gill, who's our last man on the bench and a loved guy in Washington. Love Anthony Gill with all my heart. But with the point guard situation this year, I mean, CJ McCollum has been doing a lot of the ball handling, and he's a shooting guard. And when it's not him, it's Bub Carrington, and Bub's naturally a shooting guard. And then you have the Keyshawn George experiment, which I personally think went really well, and there's potential there. But I also don't think that Keyshawn long term should be this team's point guard as well as he was playing. So we had a bunch of shooting guards and forwards bringing the ball up. But now having a guy who, as much as he's a scorer, he is a playmaker, someone that can set up his teammates, and is a true point guard. Defensive liabilities aside, he's going to be so good for that end of the floor and helping set up these young guys to get their shots. And that's just what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, speak on a little more what you expect this team to look like for the rest of the season, how much you expect Trey to play, what he's going to help the young guys with, and if you think he's going to get in the way of developing somebody like Keyshawn George or even a Trey Johnson, stuff like that.
I definitely don't think he'll be a hindrance to their development. I think he will be much more of an asset than anything else. I mean, he's 27 years old. He's in the prime of his career, but still, I don't think he's going to play much this season. Between the injury stuff he's been dealing with and the Wizards trying to get a high draft pick in this year's draft, I think we'll see him play either minimally or not much at all. I think we'll see him play just about all of the games next season. But I think when you're really going to see the impact of this trade is next year. In theory, the Wizards should have a top 3 pick, if not that, at least top 4. And given that they have Trey, I mean, everyone always says take the best player available in the draft, but I just don't think it makes sense to target a Darren Peterson if you have Trae Young and some of these other like guards, especially because Darren Peterson is a scorer first and not a playmaker. So I think you have to look towards the more bruising forward kinds. So if you plug in a Cam Boozer to this team, or you get a high enough pick and you can get AJ DeBonsa, or you end up with Caleb Wilson or Nate Ahmet, I think you plug in that piece and you put like that kind of player at a 4 next to Alex Sarr at a 5. Then you get Trae Young at the 1. You got Trey Johnson at the 2 for shooting, and then you put Keyshawn George on the wing at 3. You've got a really good team. Like that's a competent team that, given the current state of the East, if they ended up with favorable matchups, I could see that team making the second round of the playoffs. I don't know how much further than that they would get like next season, but if that team went to the second round of the playoffs next year, I think they would exceed just about every Wizards fan's expectations because this is a franchise that hasn't made a second round playoff run since 2017. So the team is just starved for action. They're starved for something that's not mediocrity. And Trae Young, yeah, he's got issues on the defensive side of the ball, but he's going to bring entertainment. He's going to get people in the seats. He's going to sell tickets because he's such a flashy offensive player and he can do so much. And there's just so much potential there. So I'm really excited for the future of this team. I feel like Trae raises the ceiling and also raises the floor at the same time.
Yeah, I think people aren't putting enough perspective on how big of a culture shock it is to get somebody like a Trae Young. I mean,
Yes.
for years he was Atlanta. He's been with rappers, like his name has been dropped in rap songs plenty of times. That's part of the Atlanta scene, but some of that is in DC, and they need somebody that can sell jerseys over there. They haven't had that in a little
For
while.
sure.
So
Yeah.
that's really interesting. And then I also wanted to speak on, or at least ask you, the defense has been getting better for Washington the last couple of weeks. Why do you think that is? And how do you, if Trae Young does start playing within the next week or so, is that going to continue to get better, or is it going to stay the same? Is it going to get worse? What do you think the trade off is with the offensive and defense of him being there?
Well, it's going to be interesting regardless. I think the team defense has definitely started to pick up. I think that starts with Alex Sarr. He's leading the league in blocks per game right now, I think at about 2.5. Keyshawn George is a very good wing defender. Trey Johnson's a net neutral on that side of the ball. And so you have a lot of pieces and younger guys that are willing to defend and willing to try, which for a tanking team that's a very young team as well, that's not nothing. That's important. And in terms of if Trey actually were to start playing the next few weeks, yeah, it's going to get tougher on the side of the ball. People are going to try and pick on him in matchups. Sarr is going to have to, I guess, do a little bit more of a Wemby role in terms of cleaning up messes that get into the paint. And that's going to be tough for him, especially given the fact that he's still so skinny. So there is a trade off, but you get more high scoring games and you get the Wizards trying to beat people by outscoring them and outfiring them as opposed to defensive battles. And again, this is a team and a franchise that has more fans cheering for the other team that come to town than cheering for the Wizards when you go to games. As someone that has been at games throughout the years, during the Bradley Beal era. It's rough. And I don't think it's going to be this extreme, but my comparison for this happening is a Messi going to Inter Miami. I think you're going to have the same kind of shock with Trae Young in DC, just because this fan base is so desperate for anything to latch onto. And you have a 27-year-old superstar point guard in his prime, even if he hasn't been playing like a superstar point guard this year, still a superstar point guard coming. And he is one of the best shows in basketball. And he's going to, I think, be a real change for this Wizards team.
Well, I love the cultural reference for Messi going to Miami too. That's nice. I was not expecting the soccer reference in there. My biggest issue with this team right now, the Wizards, is the size. And obviously, before the Trae Young, they didn't have a point guard. That was very noticeable on the offensive side of the court. Now they have that, but the size is still a big problem. They have plenty of twos and threes, and Alex Sarr essentially is what they had. So, how do you think drafting? I assume they're going to want to get a Nate Mint or a Wilson, or unless anybody else in the 4 or 5 range steps up and raises their draft stock a lot. How do you believe those two specific players are going to be able to play next to these 3 guys and Alex Sarr?
Well, Caleb Wilson, I can imagine, would fit in pretty nicely as he's got a very complete game for a power forward. He's got the shot blocking ability, um, the shooting on the other end. So there's a lot with him to be excited about. Nate Ament, I'm not quite sure. I mean, yes, he can shoot the ball, but he's just such a project player long term. He only started playing basketball like his freshman or sophomore year of high school. So he's very raw still. And there's a lot with him that needs to develop. It's kind of almost reminiscent of a Giannis, not in terms of how much he needs to bulk up physically, although there is a little bit of that, but just in terms of how raw his game is. Now, if we end up with a Debonsa or a Boozer, if we get into like we get the number 1 pick or we get something in that top 3 range, then I very much like the Boozer fit because Boozer can shoot the 3, but he's just a bruiser. He's just a big body. He'll get rebounds, and this team needs more rebounding. So with him, I feel like he would be a very nice complement to Sar. And then Debonsa, just as someone that can do a little bit of everything. A lot of people have compared him as like something in the middle between a floor of RJ Barrett and a ceiling of Kevin Durant. And I feel like that's pretty accurate for his game. So, I mean, the worst case, he ends up being more of like an RJ Barrett type of player in terms of he can knock down some shots and play decent defense. But if he ends up with the shot making ability and like creation closer to Kevin Durant, then you've struck gold. And regardless, if we end up taking one of these like forward prospects, I think it will help bolster the defense and help make up for the gap that might be there with Trae.
Like I said, I thought that made the most sense with the size of the team and the defensive potential, issues that there could be with that. So this reminds me, especially as a Raptors fan, this deal kind of reminds me a lot of the Brandon Ingram deal that happened, a little after or the trade
Yeah,
deadline last season,
for
where it was
sure.
just buy really low on an all-star caliber player, however you want to describe Ingram and Trae Young. And then we needed to re-sign. The Raptors gave up a couple guys we wanted. You wouldn't give up those assets. Nothing too crazy, although the first ended up being the Pacers first, and now they're not very good looking back at it. But I'm still very happy with Ingram. Everything's going well. He signed for 3 years, 120 million. That's 40 mil a year. Do you think Trae Young would want more than that? And if he wants more than that or about that, would you be okay, re-signing, assuming he plays pretty well for the next year and a half?
I mean, if I'm Trae Young, I want a super max or as close to it as possible. And I can't blame him for wanting to get his money. But I think realistically, we'll see how he plays during the 2026-2027 NBA season. If it works out, then great. We'll sign him and hopefully we can come to a good deal. If he wants too much and we end up letting him walk, or I'd prefer a sign and trade, but even if he walks, it's not the end of the world because if you look at what we gave up, it was an expiring CJ McCollum that we would have traded or waived anyways after the deadline. And Kispert wasn't doing too much. So it's really not a huge loss for us at the end of the day. And it still made us better for that year. So regardless of what happens, even if we don't re-sign him, I'm not mad. If we do and we get him at a reasonable contract, then great. But one thing I do think is that the way the Wizards front office has been going now and the direction they're headed in, they're not going to make the mistake of Wizards front offices of the past and overpay a guy that they really shouldn't. They overpaid Bradley Beal. They technically didn't overpay John Wall at the time, but given everything that happened with the injuries, it overpaid. And then if you go farther back, you had the horrendous Otto Porter deal. You had the Jan Mahinmi contract. You had the Davis Bertans 5 for 80. There was some rough deals in there,
But a
but
few of those were 2016 salary cap or salary like the raise. I kind of give a little asterisk for a couple of those, but I know what you mean.
yeah. And if we had landed Kevin Durant in free agency, then that wouldn't have happened. But still, 4 for 64 for Jan Mahinmi. That was rough. So I think they'll make a smart decision, whatever it is. And there's still so many young guys to build around, even without that. And all the people are talking about, I completely forgot. I haven't even mentioned Bilal Coulibaly. He's been a very strong addition for us on the wing. He's developing his game well, and he's definitely a plus on defense. So there's still so many pieces to be excited about. And I think a year of development with Trae, regardless of what happens after that, it's a good thing for Washington.
Okay, so first off, who is going to the bench? Is it going to be Bub Carrington? Because somebody has to go to the bench for Trey whenever he plays these
Yeah.
games. You guys have too many twos and threes.
We do. It'll probably be Bob. I think given maybe for the time you feel like the rest of this year, I feel like Bub would probably be starting over Trey, but I feel like that could kind of flip. I think by next year though, Trey will have solidified himself, even if he has like a bit of a sophomore slump. Like he's shooting 40% from three right now, 45% from the field, and 90% from the free throw line. Like he's putting up elite numbers, averaging 12 a game, and that efficiency is just great. And having a playmaker like Trae Young on the court at the same time as Trey Johnson, I think you're going to get a lot more out of that than Bub minutes, especially if he's starting.
Yeah, that Trey backcourt is going to be really annoying if Trey Young stays on there for a little while. I was talking to somebody right before this podcast. Do you think Bub is a better defender than Trey Johnson, or do you think they're about even? What do you think about between the difference of them
Ooh,
two on defense?
that's tough. I would probably say about even. I mean, they're about the same size, but ultimately, yeah, I'd say about even.
Gotcha. Okay, and then you guys still have Chris Middleton on the roster. I assume you're going to
Yeah.
want to get Chris Middleton off. I know. Yeah, he's still there. Sorry.
I mean,
So
it's not a problem. He hasn't been bad for us this year. He's been an interesting guy to watch, and he handles a good bit of the offensive load. But yeah, I'm not expecting him to be there past next year.
Well, right. So do you want to? I guess you probably want to get rid of him pretty quickly, right? Quickly meaning this trade deadline. What do you think you might be able to get for him if he's playing the way he's been playing?
That's a good question. I think ultimately with Middleton, his value isn't in terms of his production at this level, it's his salary. I think it's much more of a, if you end up with a deal like CJ's, where you have a guy on an expiring contract and you want to get rid of that. I think he'll be traded for his contract, not for his production and what he could bring to a team. So if we offload him at the trade deadline and we get something back for it, great. If we end up cutting him like afterwards and or waiving him, then that's fine too. If he just leaves in the off season, I'm really fine with that. But I'm not too worried ultimately. I don't think he's really hurting the development of any guys. I think he's a good veteran presence for us. So I think that'll work itself out. I'm not too worried.
Then you guys lost Corey Kispert, who's kind of in a similar enough role, like the 3-4, I guess, because not really having Chris on starting threes is getting slower in his older age.
He
So
is.
yeah, yeah. All right.
That's
Now, obviously, you're still a pretty big NBA guy, not just Wizards. What
yeah.
how do you feel about the Hawks? What they're going to look like going forward? I guess for the rest of this season first.
Well, it's going to be interesting, that's for sure. I feel like so much of it just comes down to Porzingis ultimately. How healthy he is and how well he plays really determines the ceiling of this Atlanta team. Because Jalen Johnson's going to be your star, and um, Jalen Johnson's going to be your star. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is your point guard. And you've got other pieces. Risa Shea's having a bit of a down year, sophomore slump. It happens. But I think there's still a lot of potential with him. But you have the core of a good team and one that is ready to at least make a second round appearance, I would say, in the playoffs. But so much of it just depends on, is Porzingis healthy? Is he blocking shots around the rim? Is he making his threes at a high clip? Is he setting screens? Is he doing all the things that you would want from a healthy 7-3 big guy? If he is, then that really raises the ceiling of the team. And if not, it really hinders what they're capable of. So I think he's really the big thing to keep an eye on.
I think it's really interesting that you think they're going to be a second round exit. I mean, they're in the 9 seed right now as a play-in team and playing better
That's
without Trae Young. They just lost Trae Young. Like, who do you think they're going to beat in the first round? I guess.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, thinking about the standings, depending on Orlando's health, I think that could be rather interesting, depending on, is Paolo healthy? Is Franz healthy? How are they playing as a whole? Um, the Cavs have been prone to meltdowns in the past. I don't think it'll end up working up match out wise where they play them, but that could be interesting. Um, 76ers, if you have the wrong assortment of injuries, I could see it happening. Um, the Raptors, I know
Don't you
you
do it? Don't you do it?
I'm just saying, they haven't been there with that group. They're still relatively young and inexperienced, and not that the Hawks are much more experienced. But I'm just saying, if it's a Raptors Hawks first round matchup, I do think there is a possibility the Hawks could win in 7 if they're all bringing their A game and Jalen Johnson's just like playing out of his mind. So I'm not saying it's likely, but I am saying that it's possible. It's definitely the ceiling. I can't see them going anywhere past the second round or putting up a fight in the second round against a team like the Pistons, Knicks, or the Celtics once they get Jason Tatum back. Oh, that's going to be so much fun. But I do think I think they'll at least make it to the playoffs from the plan, and then after that, we'll see what happens. It's the playoffs. I mean, the Miami Heat with Jimmy Butler a few years ago made it to the finals. So, as Kevin Garnett would say, anything is possible.
That's right. That's right. And you're also a Celtics fan, at least part-time Celtics fan when the Wizards are hard to watch. So I
Which
forgot to
has
mention
been,
that
yeah,
too.
the last few years. I spent a lot more time watching Celtics games over the last 2 years than the Wizards because Celtics basketball has been much better quality basketball. And as someone that just loves watching the game, you get much better quality watching Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown than watching Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma. So,
Right. And I think people what's interesting is that people didn't realize how good of a ball handler CJ McCollum was when he was playing
well,
for the Wizards because not a ton of eyes were on the Wizards. Not that he's a point guard, but I honestly think he's the best ball handler on this team now that Trae Young's gone. I would take him over Alexander Walker. He will get less touches than Jalen Johnson, but I think he's probably a less turnover prone, better decision maker than Jalen Johnson is. And Dyson Daniel is not my favorite ball handler either. So
no, I like him on defense. I'm not as much on all. If the NBA were position based where you had offensive and defensive players, he would be a full-time defensive player.
right. I will say, I think they're still limited by the lack of a point guard, which I know is kind of goofy. They just traded away like a franchise point guard essentially. But I don't know how good their offense can be without somebody really like making the right decisions, right? And controlling the offense and slowing it down when it needs to. That isn't Jalen Johnson. I love Jalen Johnson. I had him in fantasy for a year last year as well.
Oh yeah,
Great
he's a
at
good.
that. I don't need to tell you that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But I don't I just as a ball handler, I think it's an issue. And I think I think they have a little bit of depth issues as well. I mean, there's question marks with Atlanta, like you had talked about, where their ceiling is relatively high, but they're going to need to fix a couple problems, and that might be at the trade deadline as well. I don't know that they're done. I have to imagine they're going to make
I would
another
be
move.
surprised if they were done. I mean, given I don't know if they're gonna get him, but there's been the Anthony Davis rumors. I don't think they're gonna trade for a more traditional point guard. I don't see them dealing CJ again. I mean, because CJ, even if he's not traditionally a point guard, he can still technically fill the role, and he can get you 20 points on any given night. He is still one heck of a scorer. So they're not getting an asset worth nothing. Like CJ is still a solid player who can fill in like for minutes and get you points. But it's going to be very interesting to see how how like I guess what is it? The next month or so? Yeah, because the deadline is February 5th. Seeing what Atlanta comes up with to try and bolster their roster. Or if they don't do anything. That could happen too, technically.
Right. And honestly, thinking about it for a little bit, I don't know that there's any kind of guards that are going to provide a better role than they're looking for that are going to be available and, like raise the ceiling of the team. Like,
Yeah.
fast first guys that are pretty solid on defense, but need to be able to shoot as well. I don't know that there's guys out there that they would be willing to risk, draft compensation for.
Definitely not. I mean, for Atlanta, like even if they didn't do anything this year and they're just a first round exit, they still have that Pelicans pick, and that could very well end up being a top 5 pick. So they could just completely bolster their roster with another top draft pick and be looking even better next year.
I always forget that they traded that pick to Atlanta, man.
That's so
I
crazy.
don't know what that GM over there is doing in New Orleans. He just
He
got the
didn't
job, but he's
realize he
already
didn't
messing up
realize at the
everything.
time. I read the articles. He didn't realize like what he was giving up exactly. Atlanta like had to ask him repeatedly, like just to be sure, you want to give this up unprotected, and he was like, yes.
How much is
So
this guy getting paid to make decisions like this?
that probably 7 figures.
Unbelievable. All right. Well, as a Wizards fan, what do you think of the trade? I feel like you're probably gonna be pretty biased, but I think you're gonna be on the right side of it. So first off, what do you grade the trade for the Wizards?
I mean, I would grade this trade an A. I don't think there's a better asset you could have gotten. And I think this is ultimately going to be one of those deals where both teams look back in a year, and if both of them were like, hey, would we do this again? I think they would both say yes. Because it was clear Trae wasn't working in Atlanta, and the Wizards were the perfect destination for him on literally all accounts in terms of salary, in terms of fit, in terms of role. So I am a huge fan of this trade. I know Stephen A wasn't because I turned on First Take this morning and I listened to him. And I'm a big fan of Stephen A. But what pissed me off was he was talking about the trade and he was like, "Yeah, I don't watch the Wizards." And like for a media guy like him who's watching like the best of like basketball and like also covering football and things of that nature, I get not tuning into the Washington Wizards, but then commenting on the take feels really uneducated. I mean, being like, "Oh yeah, no, I don't really see us going anywhere for the Wizards. He can't play on defense and he's been injured this year. Like I don't get it." Like it clearly makes perfect sense if you think about this from the Wizards' point of view. Like you're getting a super talented point guard, a guy who can average 25 and 10 for you, who's going to help the development of all your young players. Yeah, he's a problem on defense, but that's not the Wizards' biggest concern right now. Their concern is getting their young guys better, making a run in a year or two, and getting fans in seats. And Trae Young accomplishes like all of those things. So you could not ask for a better point guard or a better return for the Wizards. So I am incredibly happy with this trade.
So, okay, let me ask. You said a lot of positive there, which obviously you graded an A, but what's stopping it from being an A plus, or can something happen to move it up to an A plus for you in the future?
I mean, I think an A plus would have been if we could have found a way to get draft compensation. Like, imagine we got Trey and a first or something like that. Like, that'd be ridiculous. Like, that would be an A plus because you're getting draft compensation. Or if
Why the
Trey
hell would they attach draft to like Trae Young
I'm
as
just
well?
saying, there were some Wizards fans online that were like, "Oh, if we include AJ Johnson in the deal, you should give us that unprotected first from New Orleans because AJ Johnson's got a lot of potential. He's been balling out in the G League, playing well in Wizards games too,
Balling
and
out of the G
we're
League.
doing them
Okay.
such a big favor by like letting them walk away with nothing." But in reality, that pick has been described by media members and executives as literally untouchable. But even getting another pick or something like that, either having that added to it or I don't know. If Trae Young was 6'4" and did everything he did and could play defense too.
Well, I'm not talking about changing Trae Young. Trae Young's Trae Young. He's like
He
27
is.
years old. I
He
mean,
is.
like Trae Young playing up to it, or like getting a small contract, or leaving immediately, and you guys sign a trade and getting somebody else. Like
We
that would
could
make it an A plus for
retain
me.
him for something reasonable, like in the $30 million range per year. Like I would be beyond the moon ecstatic. I would be so happy with that. If we could get him like 4 for 120, I don't think he'll sign for that. I think he's worth more than that, honestly. But as long as we don't give him like an over bloated contract, if we give him something reasonable, then I would, and it like it leads to real success down the line, then for sure this will be an A plus. It's just there's still a few unknowns that we're waiting on.
Well, that's my biggest problem. I've been calling him a relatively low. It's interesting. I'm calling him like a relatively low ceiling for like a superstar level player. The stats that he's putting up and him
Yeah.
reaching the conference finals so early in his career. But I was in the he was averaging 29 and 10 as a sophomore. So,
Yeah.
but that's always been my issue with him. If he does sign for 120 and 4 years? What do you expect you guys to have like a championship contending kind of core with him in 4 years or so if everybody develops how they want to and good draft picks?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just squaring away the contracts with the young guys, but I'm incredibly high on all the Wizards' young talent. We're good at getting young talent. As you can see, whenever the young talent goes to other teams, if you look at Rui Hachimura with an improved role on the Lakers, you look at Denny Avdia in Portland, balling out now. Minus like Johnny Davis, this team is incredible at drafting talent. So
Johnny
the
Davis.
the Taco Bell commercial. That's genuinely how I knew him at first. I didn't watch a single game of him in Wisconsin, and I was like, so we drafted a small guard that can't shoot? Why? And it didn't work out. But anyways, we have Trey Johnson, who's like an absolute sniper. We have Bilal Coulibaly, who I think has a lot of potential as an up-and-coming wing. Alex Sarr can develop into an all-star big man, and Keyshawn George has taken a leap, and I think he's not done taking leaps. So we have those four, and then we have Trae Young, and then we have this magical top four pick on top of it. Like, if this team develops nicely, this could very well be a team just like the Pistons, where we look up in 3 years, and next thing you know, the Wizards are at the top of the Eastern Conference. It's not impossible, and the fact is the path has been paved for it. So I have hope. And those are words I haven't spoken in many, many years, but I
I was
have
gonna say
hope for
Wizards fan and Hope don't usually not
they
the last
really
few
don't
years been
belong in the same sense
conversation.
most of the time. But this front office has given me hope. And for that alone, even if it doesn't pan out the way that it would in Fantasyland, I'm grateful for that.
Definitely. So what about for the Hawks? What do you grade this trade for the Hawks?
Uh B minus probably, maybe a B. I mean, ultimately, this was probably the best, if not only, deal they were going to find. They got rid of the contract situation, which was their goal. CJ McCollum's not a negative asset. They didn't have to give up draft picks, which I personally think they should have. Although they didn't get any draft picks either, so that's not nothing. Um, it's kind of crazy looking back that Luca and Trey collectively, when getting traded, accounted for one first round draft pick between the two of them.
You got to stop asking for draft picks with Trae Young, man. This was never going to happen. I don't know what kind of stuff you were reading about, but this is
You
no,
need to
that's
stop.
unbelievable.
Clearly, you are not engaged in Wizards Twitter the way I am.
If they're saying that shit, I don't want to be engaged with it at all.
All right. Well, because there's some real fans out there, people that have been suffering for even longer than I have, people that suffered through the Gilbert Arenas days. I just had to read about those. I didn't live them. But regardless, it's overall it's a B minus for the Hawks because it's not a bad move, and it's the best thing they could have done, but it's not a good move either. You're giving up a 27-year-old all-star in his prime for pennies on the dollar.
I can't believe any kind of pennies on the dollar, like while a guy's in his prime trade, could even be as high as a B. Like I don't, I just, it's probably a C minus or a D for me, like a D plus. I don't know how they didn't get a pick just in general. I seriously like this guy has been an all star through the last 4 years. His career average is probably like 26, 25, and
Yeah.
8 assists a game. He's he's got a lot of questions on defense. Like I said, I'm not the biggest Trae Young fan, but this guy should have more value than two salary fillers, depending on how you see
Hey,
Corey Kispert.
the Wizards front office are some master negotiators. Say what you will, but not having to give up any picks, no young talent really. Because Corey Kispert, we've seen a lot, and I like him, but he's very clearly limited in terms of his role and production and what he can bring to a team. So I'm not mad about that. People were talking about us having to give up Bilal Coulibaly, which would have made more sense, like from Atlanta perspective, because he's a promising up and coming young player. And like you would expect if Trey was like where he should be in terms of his stock, we would have to be giving up CJ. Belial, maybe another young guy, and then two or three firsts. If this was like a proper deal and it wasn't the whole salary thing beat with the timing being as weird as it is. But yeah, I mean, they got rid of the salary situation. They did what they set out to do, and that was the best they could do. So
See, I
maybe not.
really expected either a first or two, like well, maybe not two firsts. I don't, looking back at it, obviously they couldn't get a single, pick, so maybe not, but probably a first or a couple seconds, and then Bub Carrington instead of Corey Kispert, or maybe on top of Corey Kispert because of the salary. I feel
Yeah, that
like
would make sense too.
that
But
because he wasn't playing super good at the beginning of the year, he wasn't hitting his threes like he is the last month or so. I really thought that was how it was going to turn out, and I just was really really surprised. So I would probably say closer to an A for the Wizards and
hmm
D plus for the Hawks. I don't think this is going to be very good in a couple
C
of years.
plus. You were a lot hard.
I don't know how you like you said himself. He's pennies on the dollars, like guy in his prime, all star, and then they only got two salary guys that won't be there in 2 years. How is it a
This
B?
comes down to a longer problem with Atlanta of them holding on to their assets for too long. And obviously, Washington has had that problem in the past with both John Wall and Bradley Beal. Thankfully, this new front office doesn't as much. But if you look at Atlanta, they held on to Trae Young for too long and they didn't capitalize on his value. They hung on to John Collins for too long and couldn't capitalize on his value before he went to Utah. And they hung on to DeJounte Murray for too long before they traded him and they couldn't capitalize on his value. So it's a series of recurring events within Atlanta. So this is kind of par for the course with them.
Especially with John Collins. Like
Yeah.
that guy was that. I don't think he was ever maybe an all star caliber, like half tier below that. But he was really good, like probably averaging 20 and 9 on a a playoff play in kind of team. And
Yeah.
he got nothing for it because they were 2 years too late, like you were talking about.
I always never knew what to make of him because early on in his career he had the testing positive for like human growth hormone. It's like every time I watched him play after that, that was like all I could think about. Him and DeAndre Ayton. Those are like the two steroid cases in the NBA in like the past like 7-ish years or something like that. The ones that have been documented at least. But
Right, right. Yeah, definitely. So, okay, so talk a little more about the Wizards front office as well, how they have been doing since their new guy came in a couple years ago, and maybe a little bit before that too.
yeah, I mean, they've been doing a great job under the leadership of Will Dawkins. I mean, they've drafted relatively well, minus Johnny Davis. We're not talking about that. Or actually, he might have been the year after we did the Johnny Davis pick. I'm not 100% sure. But regardless, we've drafted well. We've made relatively good deals. They came in a really crappy situation with the Beal contract and no flexibility and limited draft room. And we managed to pivot Bradley Beal into Chris Paul, into Jordan Poole, into CJ McCollum, now into Trae Young. And I think if back in the day you had told the Wizards fans we were giving up Bradley Beal for Trae Young, it would have been like, all right, cool. That's actually great when you consider the Beal deal. But anyways, so you have that. You have relatively good asset management since then. I mean, it hasn't been perfect, but I think it's been much improved since the older Wizards management. And there's a clear direction with the franchise. And the other teams in the NBA, like the Pistons and the Thunder and the Spurs, have showed there's a path with developing the young guys, keeping the core together, and just letting that core develop and eventually become a playoff team. And I think they're really on the track now.
I can definitely see that. I looked it up. Johnny Davis's blood is not on Will Dawkins' hands. That was a year before, so you're
Okay,
good on
that's what
that.
I thought. I
He's
didn't.
still golden.
I was
So that
really worried. I was like, I don't think Will Dawkins drafted Johnny Davis, but if he did, that's the only stain.
is the only rap. No, he's good. He's good on that.
Thank God.
And I think it's interesting you say like there are teams out there that have already showed that you can just draft really well and make smart decisions through the front office and practically be a contender just off of natural development alone,
For
as long as you
sure.
have the group of guys for and the team chemistry. Do you believe that Alex Sarr, Keyshawn George, and whatever you get this year with the Pelicans pick, or not the Pelicans pick, excuse me, whatever you guys get for this year with your own
Uh,
pick,
yeah.
what do you think is going to happen? Like, do you think those three guys are going to be on a contending team in a couple years?
Yes. I firmly believe that. I think especially if we get the number one pick and it ends up being Devonsa, I think you have a guy with an all NBA ceiling like that and two other complementary pieces that are all-star level. You're looking at a big three like the Thunders all of a sudden. And then you put Trae Young on top of that as a point guard, you definitely got a team that can contend. I mean, there's no telling where the East is going to be in a few years. I think it'll be a lot better than it is right now.
I hope
But
so.
yeah, I do too. The West is just loaded relative to the East. But I think you really have something there just because the potential on these young guys is through the roof.
Right. All right. So the next thing I got here too is that, Trae Young, like you said before, Trae Young, his value has been going down for the last few years. Even though he's been an all-star the last 2 years, people are still realizing that You can't win 40 games every season. I mean, the best they've had when he's been there was a 41 and 39, I think. It was barely over 500, a little short in season was when it was, and that was when I believe that was when they made the playoffs and had that miracle run with Ben Simmons. You know, the whole Trae Young thing. That
Yeah.
that's like it's just there's a ceiling on the team that's led by this guy, at least from what we can tell with Atlanta. What do you think he could have gone for 2 or 3 years ago if they had traded him?
I mean, looking at what Mikal Bridges went for, looking at what Desmond Bane went for, those are all guys in the same draft class. You could have seen, I think, easily 3 to 4 first rounders for Trae, and that's on top of, I think, probably 3 first rounders, and then on top of like having a really solid like core trade piece back, and then another supplemental player too. But I think you could have had 2 to 3 players and like 2 to 3 picks too. Like I think you could have not quite Luca, but you could have gotten a haul for this man. I think.
Right, right. All right, and then last thing or next thing here is, do you think the Wizards are going to do anything at this trade deadline in a month? Maybe move off Milton like we talked about before, or do you think they're going to wait it out and see what happens and just draft somebody with a high pick coming up?
Honestly, I kind of hope they don't do much. They've made their move. That's really what they should be doing. If they find a good deal for Middleton, then cool. But I honestly don't mind having him as the veteran presence till the end of the year. The depth is definitely an issue that's going to need to be solved in the off season and in the years up ahead. But there's time to figure that out. There'll be cap space to figure that out. So I think honestly, the best thing they can do is not do anything rash. Just keep calmly building and getting better, like one move, one transaction at a time, which is what this front office has been really good at doing so far. So honestly, if the Wizards have a pretty quiet trade deadline, then that's a good thing for me as a fan.
No, that's totally fair. The Hawks, on the other hand, I don't think they're going to have a small deadline, a quiet
I
deadline like
don't
you had
think
talked
so
about
either.
before. Everybody's talking about Anthony Davis, and I don't know if that'll happen. I don't know what Anthony Davis's value is 100% at this point in his career. I think he's 32, so and he's obviously had the injury problem for many years now. Do you think first off they would go after somebody like Anthony Davis? Do you think they're going to make another move at the
I wouldn't
deadline?
be surprised if they went after Anthony Davis, though. I don't think Anthony Davis wants to go to the Hawks without Trae Young. I think Trae Young being there was a big reason why, because you have that point guard to set you up, pick and rolls. But so I don't know if he's interested in that, and but it's not out of the realm of possibility at the same time. There's definitely potential for him to be on the move. If I'm a team, though, I'm looking at him. I don't think he's a piece that's going to put us over the top. There's so much in the way of injury concerns. And whenever you trade for a big guy like this late in their career when they're like injury riddled, like it never turns out well. It never ends up being the piece you need it to be. The biggest example is coming to my mind right now was Anthony Davis's teammate, DeMarcus Cousins. When the Warriors traded for him in 2018, 2019, it was seen as like oh, well, they already had the death lineup, and then they had an all-star big man who can stretch the floor and shoot threes. It's literally over for the league. And he just didn't end up doing much for the team, and they ended up losing in the finals that year. Not to any fault of his. It was due to the injuries, of course. But these
And the Raptor team was just better. Don't forget.
Oh, shut up. But like in general, when you have an injured older big man like that on the move, not going to be as impactful as you think they are. So I think you're going to see teams maybe a little more cautious to trade for Anthony Davis.
That's totally fair. I will say I drew up a trade here for the Hawks getting Anthony Davis because there's been a little bit of motion around it. What I have here for the audio listeners is the Hawks getting Anthony Davis and then Dante Exum and then Brandon Williams. And in return, the Mavericks would get Kristaps Porzingis, Zachary Ricochet, Austin Newell, and Vit Krejci. And there are a couple caveats to this deal. I'll explain those in a minute. But first off, just those guys, if that trade happened, Austin, how would you feel for both sides?
That's an interesting one, just because while Ricochet hasn't been playing well, I can't see Hawks management moving off of him that quickly 2 years after they drafted him. GMs typically tend to be pretty attached to the guys they draft, and they have a hard time letting them go because letting them go is admitting that they made a mistake and that they were wrong. So I just have a hard time seeing Ricochet go. And Porzingis going back to the Mavericks after it went so poorly the first time, I don't know about that. Instead of Luca, you got Kyrie running the show, but Mark Cuban is much more involved with the team again after Nico Harrison's departure, and so I just think that could make for a rather interesting dynamic. Anthony Davis on the Hawks again. I think you're going to be getting a lot of what you have with Porzingis in terms of when he's healthy, great, it raises your ceiling, but when he's not, it's not good looks.
That's totally fair, but you can say, objectively that Anthony Davis, if he is healthy and Porzingis being healthy, the ceiling is much higher for Anthony Davis-led team than a
Yeah.
Porzingis team,
If he is
right?
healthy and playing at an all-star level, then 100% the ceiling is higher.
And that's what he's been doing since he's been healthy for the last couple of years, but it's not been a ton of healthy like you were talking about. I understand what you're saying about Ricochet. Well, first off, Porzingis needs to go in the trade. He's
Yeah, to
worth
make the
$30 million.
salaries work, I get it.
There's no
Just
way where they can't like they would trade Jalen Johnson essentially, and that nobody's doing that, right?
yeah.
No Hawks fan is. I understand what you're saying about Ricochet. I don't. I think I actually like Ricochet a decent bit, but he's such a low ceiling floor when we're comparing him to other first overall picks or low ceiling player that I wouldn't. I think it would make sense to get off of him if you were the Hawks because I don't think his value is gonna like unless you see him in your future, right,
Yeah.
and like him raising the ceiling of your team, whatever it looks like in 2 or 3 years. It makes sense to get off him and kind of admit that mistake. Not that it was a mistake, but it was
Yeah, I
just a weird
completely
draft
agree
process for
with
that
you.
guy.
And I mean, yeah, the Hawks couldn't do anything when Alex Sarr forced his way to the Wizards because he knew how great of an organization they were. But I think it's the right thing to do to move on. I just don't think they're going to do it.
That's totally fair. And yeah, I don't know that it's the right thing to do either, but I think this is what makes the most sense. And there's some caveats that are interesting too. So first off, Dante Exum is on a 1 year minimum. All the guys are on minimums for the guards that are going to be going with Anthony Davis potentially. But Exum is out for the rest of the season. He may not have an NBA contract after this year, so that would just be writing off 2 million for the
Yes,
rest.
yeah.
Like nobody cares about that. Brandon Williams and Jaden Hardy are pretty much the other two options that you would throw in this to make the rosters max out and fit right.
Yeah.
And Brandon Williams offers more passing and I think a little more defense than Jaden Hardy does. I liked Hardy when he was younger as a defender, but he kind of backed off a little bit on that end.
Brandon Williams is a solid option.
Definitely. And then Hardy, I like Hardy a little bit too. He's more of a shooter. He's actually one of the only guys who's still shooting pretty, above the average on that team. So if you want shooting, like it just depends on whatever the Hawks are really valuing. If you're valuing shooting and passing around Anthony Davis, which I think you'd want at least shooting, you would keep Hardy in the deal if that's possible. If you just want to clean the books, you would have X in the deal. If you want extra passing because the team is not really have a point guard per se on that team, you would want Brandon Williams on there.
Yeah.
What are your preferences between the two those two guys on the Hawks?
I think Brandon Williams will probably make more sense for them just as a little bit more solid of a two-way guard. But kind of like you were saying, I could see it going either way with that.
Right. And then you don't need to have Risa Shea on there. You can also the Onyeka Okongwu is pretty close in salary, so you could in theory have Okongwu instead of Risa Shea
I think the
just for
Mavs would
payment
definitely
trade
want
work.
Kongwu because maybe again ceiling. They don't know how much higher it'll get, but he's just a very solid 5-man. But then again, also thinking about it, they have Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively, so maybe not. Maybe they would be more inclined for a Risa Shea.
They have him. They have him right now, anyways. I don't know that
Yeah.
they're going to be on the roster after next year, even after the deadline.
Yeah, we'll see.
Um, But then, yeah, so it's one of those two. Again, however, they want, it doesn't really matter. And then Austin Newell, I added because he's a young guy, but he's barely touched the court. He was, I think he was like the 11th pick. It was a lottery pick for sure out of Georgia, but he hasn't done much. And then the last option instead of E. Krejci, if you don't want him, is Luke Kennard. But Kennard makes 9 more million than Krejci does. The Mavericks are already really expensive, so I figured they
Yeah.
wouldn't need that. And then the Hawks are going to need spacing if they have
I
Anthony
can't
Davis.
imagine Atlanta wanting to give him up.
Yeah, you'd rather have Kennard on that team than Krejci,
Sure.
anyways. So yeah, that's my thought about that trade. I think it makes the most sense there, but it's not perfect on either side. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not sure either of these teams get better or worse a ton out of this trade. To be honest, it's kind of irrelevant if you ask me, but it still may happen.
That's true. I don't think it'll be a big swing either way where they're seen as a more serious threat in their respective conferences after that. But again, it feels like something that could happen. We'll see how things go over this next month.
Definitely. And then last thing we had on here is, does this affect the trade market at all going, forward for the next month in the trade deadline? Because you would expect Trae Young to get more than he did. Is this going to hurt the market going forward for people trying to trade their superstars or their good role players that people have demand for?
I don't think it'll hurt the market in that sense. I do think it's interesting. This has been like the first trade of this NBA season. That's kind of crazy to me. Normally we have smaller stuff, but we just haven't. The Trae Young situation is so unique because of the contract situation and that they didn't play well with him, and you could just tell it wasn't a good fit. I don't know that John Morant's going to get a huge return if he gets traded just because he's a non-shooter and not doing as much athletic stuff as he used to, and has been kind of having an off season. But like relative to other high-profile players on the trade market, I know Giannis just said he's committed to staying with the Bucks and doesn't really want to leave. But like if a player like him was on the market, I don't think this Trae Young deal is making a massive impact on what you're going to get for other guys.
Yeah, that's fair. All right. Well, that's all I had for today's episode. Thank you for listening to the first episode of the Open Throne podcast, and make sure to tune in for our next episode coming soon.